Global Sport Matters presents, in collaboration with Columbia University Sports Management, the Sports Professors Podcast, where Professors Kenneth Shropshire and Scott Rosner discuss the 101 on what happened in sports business.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Professors Podcast. Scott Rosner, Academic Director of the Sports Management Program at Columbia University, along with Ken Shropshire, the CEO of the Global Sport Institute at Arizona State University. What's going on, Ken?
Hey, man, good day. There, not to pinpoint what time it is. Good day to you.
Now, we are recording this on Juneteenth, June 18th, which just became a federal holiday.
We would have taken the day off, but the feds didn't give us enough notice. The show must go on.
That is exactly right. But a great day and a great week for many reasons, including that. So our conversation today, as it always is, around the business and legal aspects of sports. A lot has happened. Again, as a reminder, we record on the Friday before, so there may be more that has happened in the meantime that you will be caught up on. So don't hold us to the timeliness of this conversation. But Ken, last time we talked about Naomi Osaka jumping out of the French Open. Now it's been announced that she will not be playing at Wimbledon this year either, although it does sound like she intends to return for the Summer Olympic Games in Tokyo. Thoughts and follow-up on that?
Well, first, in terms of when we record and the information we put out there, we've been pretty good so far, I think. So far, so good, which means we're going to make some kind of prediction today that will be way off base. So
the other shoe is about to drop.
Right. Well, don't break your arm, pat yourself on the back for limited success. I think it's great that she is taking time for herself and that she is, in some ways, illustrating how to have the proper priorities in life, that she's not ready to play, so she's not going to play. It's interesting. I was talking with my wife about this whole idea of when you play and when you don't play. And you think about Federer, you think about guys as they get older who do things like play. I'm only playing 5 or 6 tournaments a year. So that, and this is not the same thing, but I think it's a right that you earn apart from something that's necessitated by your health.
And just as a reminder, so when Diane speaks, Ken's wife, about the world of tennis, she knows very much of what she speaks as a former professional player, played at Wimbledon, NCAA champion. So an informed conversation at that, much more so than most conversations, that might be held with folks who just look at it as fans. She was a professional player.
Yeah, who aspired to not play in tournaments that she didn't want to play in, but she had to play in all of them. But that's so she had on the continuum, Naomi Osaka, especially for the health reasons, but otherwise it's and we see it with golfers. You're more selective and you don't have to play in everything. I think it's going to be great, and if it's strategic, what she can do at the Olympic Games if she's able to play then and to play at home in front of the home crowd for her nation. That will be fabulous.
And there is no doubt about it. And look, there are benefits to being an independent contractor, which the professional golfers and the professional tennis players, individual sport athletes are. So they're not employees. There are incentives and some disincentives that are structurally in place to try to get you to play as many tournaments as possible. But and certainly from a sponsorship standpoint as well. But there is this idea that you have earned the right to do so in certain circumstances. And this certainly is one that I think we all agree is more than appropriate for Osaka to continue to take a break and focus on her personal issues.
The one other interesting comparison is, though, it is the idea of NBA players resting, and this whole idea of, we accepted it for a long time, not forever for fans, with pitchers and pitch count and how many pitches you should throw and that sort of thing. And then you've got to take a break, as opposed to, that famous video of Kellen Winslow against the Miami Dolphins years ago, playing multiple downs and being drug off the field by his teammates and getting a IUV of fluids to bring himself back to life. I mean, all that is what many of us aspire for athletes to be, but there's a whole lot has changed, and Naomi Osaka is added to this change. Mental health is a space where they get to rest as well.
Absolutely. And understanding the sports science piece and the mental health piece, has really fueled a lot of our understanding of this, our how we perceive this. But there's downside to this too. And the NBA athletes in particular treated a little bit differently, because you always have with baseball players, the Sunday afternoon game after a Saturday night game, there was always, you got to kind of the junior varsity team, right? As you would give a lot of the starters a rest, and the NBA rest issue certainly coming to the fore. LeBron James tweeting this in the past week or so about his thoughts regarding all the injuries that have been built up and superstar players in the playoffs because of the condensed nature of the season. I look at that as a little bit different, right? And the same thing with press obligations. We'll use one of my favorite professional athletes, Joel Embiid, about this the other day after they, as we record this, in Game 5, there was a 26-point blown lead by the Sixers, and Embiid refused to talk to the press after the game. To me, I look at that as, hey, that's part of the responsibilities of the job. Right. This is one of the things that you are compensated for, and you have an obligation to speak to the press, win, lose, or draw, play well, play terrible. It's part of the gig. With Osaka, there were underlying conversations around it. She's an independent contractor. Again, it's a little bit different. Here, you're an employee of the team that is part of this larger league. And I think there is a bit of a difference and that there is an obligation there to speak to the press in that case. Again, understanding the rest piece and strategically using rest. I get it from the athlete's perspective. I get it from the team's perspective. Obviously a difficult issue from the league perspective, from a broadcaster perspective, and from a sponsor perspective. You know what?
I don't know if I fully agree with you on Embiid. I mean, it's very interesting. So and think way back to, was it Dwayne Thomas? Who was the Dallas Cowboys running back? Maybe one of the ones to say, I'm not going to
Dwayne Thomas and Steve Carlton, right? Growing up in Philadelphia, just wouldn't talk to the media, right?
So,
which is probably better for Steve Carlton, by the way, given what some of the stuff he says. Probably better that we didn't know what he was actually thinking as an athlete.
I think that its distinction is if there has to be a real reason, but not no reason at all. I mean, the idea that you lost, which, you lose when you're 26 points up. Maybe you do have something going on in your head that's a little bit unusual, and you can't deal with it. I don't know. I'm not the one to make that call, but I think it's the genuineness of the moment. Not, I'm perfectly fine, but I don't want to deal with this. Is a whole nother issue. It's something to continue to watch, because this is the gun rights kind of argument, as we give a little, the floodgates will open, and more people will claim that, I can't do this, and how far will it go? And we don't want to allow anyone to belittle the seriousness of genuine illness.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, but there is a slippery slope element to all of this.
Yeah, that's that law phrase I wanted to.
That's exactly right. So, Ken, have you followed the Euros at all? The soccer tournament?
I've been following only because I knew I was going to have to discuss this with you. But I am the two things I am curious about are both the player that had the heart issue on the pitch. How about that? And that the multiple players that had an issue with Coca-Cola in the press room. So first, talk about Christian Eriksen. I mean, talk about that a little bit. But I think probably some listeners aren't that familiar with who he is and what happened. And the key piece of that is the idea that this incident occurs, and then the idea of when do you continue to play, which is a sports business issue all the time.
All the time.
After an event.
So Christian Eriksen, who the star player for the Danish national team and tremendous player, plays for Inter Milan in Italy, formerly played for Tottenham Hotspur, is truly a superstar. In about the 42nd minute, so late in the first half of the opening game for Denmark in the tournament, suffers a cardiac arrest and goes down, is given immediate medical attention, players circling him. The captain of the team actually turned him over, which played a big role in helping him survive the event. Administered CPR, emergency medical treatment on the field. There are stories that are out there that we haven't been able to verify that there wasn't actually an ambulance on duty at the stadium, but we don't know about that. They had to summons one. That is hearsay at this point. And as it turns out, Eriksen's going to be okay. He's going to have a defibrillator inserted in his chest. His playing days may or may not be over. For a lot of our listeners, the incident that you're probably most familiar with is Hank Gathers. And his sudden death on the court 3 decades ago, and what an image that is burned in, I think, in a lot of people's minds. And it was the soccer version of that, and very scary.
This was in the same family.
It was. I don't know. I mean, they haven't disclosed what it was. We know that Gathers had been treated for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, an enlargement of the heart, and wasn't taking his medicine. And it was, a seismic event, I think in the sports world. And so in Eriksen's case, he's going to be okay. But then there is a conversation between the UEFA, the European governing body for football, and the heads of each national association from both Finland and Denmark, the participants in the match, about what to do. And they left it then up to a player vote to determine whether or not to resume the game later that day at the same time. And it was a match that Denmark was dominating at the time, but it was still 0-0, and or to postpone it and see. And the players didn't really know that what was going on with Eriksen. It wasn't clear what had actually happened. If he was, they knew he was alive, but that was about it. And the match, the players said, yeah, let's continue the match, feeling pressured to do so. And Finland wound up winning the match. I think they had 1 shot on goal the entire game, like one of those you get outshot 27-1, but your shot goes in. And I think on both teams, the players have said, yeah, it would have been better if we didn't have to make that decision, that if it was made either by UEFA or by the national associations of each team, like, you know what, like there are things that are clearly way more important than completing this first round, Euro match. Let's hold this off. Let's resume the match in a couple of days when we kind of have a better idea of what's going on. And the players have a real time to compute all of this. And you could just see it. The players just weren't there. And how could they be, right? How could they be?
And I'll tell you the thing that I thought about, and we've seen this a lot with, not a lot. We know the big instances when there's a world war, when there's the bombing of the World Trade Center, when there, Kennedy assassination. Do you play the games or not? I mean, these issues come up on occasion, and you're not prepared for those because it's different magnitudes. I wonder if in the business of sport, if the league offices, whatever they may be, if someone dies on the field of play, here's what we'll do. Right? I mean, it would seem like you have some advanced planning on a horrible issue, but it is something there's some probability that can occur across sports, just as you say, from some kind of a heart moment that it occurs to a player. So I want to, again, if I'm the commissioner of the league, from this point forward, I will make sure that there is a plan to play. And before you ask, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how long you delay. I do think in high school, somebody would get hurt, especially on the practice field, and the coach would say some version of, okay, let's move practice down here. And then he'd turn around and yell at the player that's laying on the ground, and you're killing the grass. And then we keep on playing. It's like no kind of concern for the player in any kind of way. So the idea of having some plan in place, I think is really important across sports.
Well, it is, this is one of those moments that I think will, there has been a moment of this recently. It was actually right before the pandemic started, in February of 2020. And there was a player from the St. Louis Blues, Jay Bouwmeester, a defendant, 36-year-old guy, been in the league for a long time. And he was, during a game, he collapsed on the bench just after finishing a shift. And, they had emergency medical workers getting to him. They administered CPR. He wound up it was a very similar event to what happened with Eriksson. It's one of those, those moments where I think you're right. I mean, I think that there needs to be, and it needs to be in place. And I just remember this being an ad hoc, and Bouwmeester survived, but he never played, right? I can't remember if they continued. I want to say that they stopped the game and did not continue it, but I can't recall exactly. I do remember another moment from my childhood. The Flyers had a wonderful young goaltender named Pelle Lindbergh, who died in an automobile accident in November of 1985. And they wound up it just happened to happen. It was a Saturday night, and they didn't play again until Thursday. And at that moment, the game, there were no games to be played, and they actually did go ahead and play the scheduled Thursday night game, happening against the Edmonton Oilers, who were that era were the great dynasty. And they wound up doing, I remember this like it was yesterday, doing having a full funeral service before the game, a memorial service for the player. They blacked out all the ads during the game. And it was really, it turned into a phenomenal, like one of those as a hockey fan, Flyer fan, one of the most memorable games that I ever went to. But it's just so draining. And again, we talked about Osaka in a previous episode. Look, players are humans, and they see one of their brethren, and they're so close, go down. How are they not going to respond in a way that we would respond as non-professional athletes? Right? They're going to have the same kinds of reactions.
But I would say, across sports, though, there's more of the win one for the Gipper kind of attitude than not, and that is to play the game.
Play the game. He'd want us to play.
He'd want us to play, right. The Brett Favre, when it's found out about his
father, right,
plays I don't even remember the context. The Brian Piccolo loss by the Bears. You're supposed to go out and win, but once his diagnosis came through, so it is interesting to think about. But the distinction here is it's a player on the field of play in the moment. What do you do? And I think for sure you don't continue the game.
Yeah. Now, somebody needs to be the adult, right? Somebody needs to say, you know what, let's not continue it later this day. This is what we're going to do. And you just can't abdicate that responsibility at that moment. If you're in the seat, you got to make the decision.
Although the playing tomorrow doesn't seem that much better, but it is better than continuing on.
It could be in 2 days. You give yourself time to gather. I know the fans have to come back, but if you do it the next day, like it's in Copenhagen, it's the next day. It's not like the fans aren't going to come out. Right. It was still a weekend day that you're thinking about. So that was the first big issue to come out of the Euros. The second were actually two separate issues where Paul Pogba, the wonderful French midfielder who is Muslim, sits down at his post-match press conference that, there's always a drink there and it's great sponsorship placement. This one was a Heineken. And moved out of the way. He's like, I'm moving this out of the way, right? I'm a Muslim. I don't drink. And there was some backlash against him, and I'm sure Heineken wasn't real thrilled about it. And then the second, and the one that got a lot more media attention, was Cristiano Ronaldo, the wonderful Portuguese player who is the most followed athlete on social media in the world, one of the most followed people in general in social media in the world across platforms. And he sits down and there's Coca-Cola there, a bottle of Coke. And he moves the bottle out of the way. He says, no, agua, right? Puts down water, right? And chaos ensues.
Right. And the value, I guess, Coke stock plummets.
Yeah, which we're going to talk about. That was nonsense.
But that became the social media story, though. Although, come on, how could you peg that one instance to? It was like 1.6 billion.
Yeah, it was like a $4 billion drop in market value, but that was nonsense because that was happening before Ronaldo did it, before Ronaldo had, his moment, and then the stock price actually increased, right? So there was no connection. Let's be clear about that. There was no connection between, if you're a Coca-Cola shareholder, don't hate on Cristiano Ronaldo because he did not cause the share price to go down.
You only get your news from social media, and it took some time off before people started correcting people. That's the information you got. Look at the power of these athletes in terms of endorsements. And the two other elements that I think are kind of remotely connected to this is LeBron shifting back to number 6, which was his number in Miami.
Miami.
And that it's also a salute to Bill Russell, and Dr. J was
number 6.
J was 6. And
coincidentally,
is there a movie coming out?
This is what I hear. I'm sure Space Jam 2 is being an Academy Award-winning film. But he wears number 6 in Space Jam, so it's all related to it, right?
And the final connection is, of course, Michael Jordan in Barcelona, who's in the apparel company. There was Reebok. Jordan's a Nike guy, and he drapes the American flag over the Reebok logo whenever he can for photo opportunities. So there is this athlete power connected to these brands, even selling jerseys. I mean, which is kind of the oldest. This is the Kobe Bryant, may he rest in peace, kind of trick too. You keep changing numbers, people, your jersey sales will increase dramatically.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. The Pogba, I would separate Pogba from Ronaldo in the kind of in the pantheon of these things, right? I think
Coke versus Heineken. Is it?
Yeah, Coke versus Heineken because of the religious dimension to it, right? So look, it's objectionable to him. He's Muslim. He does not drink alcohol, so it's okay to me that he doesn't want to do a press conference sitting next to a product that not only does he not endorse, that's a different question, but one that he doesn't consume based on his religious beliefs. So you don't want to give, as the athlete, the imprimatur of any sort of endorsement or anything like that for something like that. Now, I understand Heineken, the position that they sit in, right? That they're the sponsor of this. They're paying a lot of money, and part of what you're paying for is the exposure of the post-match press conference. But I think that's somehow different than Ronaldo taking it into his own hands, moving the Coke out now and putting down a bottle of water and shunning Coca-Cola. Now, I get it. It's a sugary snack. It can be, it contributes to obesity. We get that. But, I think that is ultimately a little different story. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, with that, I think it's athletes saying, "Hey, I have a brand, and I don't want my brand associated with that brand for whatever reason it might be." So I give them both credit, but I do agree with you. I mean, the idea of being associated with alcohol, I mean, that's equivalent to frankly having a pack of Winston's or Newports sitting up there. I mean, if it's not something you want to be next to, and Coke is not that severe, but certainly Coke versus water is something. So unless, and again, this is another one of those instances where some sort of previous interaction agreement without the cameras running could have been a better way to resolve it, and we wouldn't have taken these 4 minutes to talk about this.
That's right. And the other piece from a sponsorship perspective that happened in the past week was the NFL agreeing to a $30 million sponsorship deal with Diageo, the spirits manufacturer, half of which is cash, right? So about $500,000 per team, to become the first hard alcohol sponsor of the National Football League. We've seen it in other leagues. We saw it with NASCAR, with I believe it was Crown Royal in 2005. We've seen it in the NBA with Bacardi in 2010, and then Diageo after that, and now with Hennessy. It was Jack Daniels before that, and now Hennessy. as of the most, in the most recent and ongoing deal.
Brands are just flowing off your tongue like you have great familiarity.
Well, so I know some of them. We've seen it, and the NHL with Jägermeister, which I knew a long time ago, and New Amsterdam vodka, over the last couple of years. And so this is a windfall for them, obviously. In the NFL, the brands, by the way, that our listeners might be familiar with: Smirnoff, Crown Royal, Captain Morgan, Tanqueray, right? All Diageo brands that will be affiliated with the property, right?
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I think it's pretty harmless. I think so long we've gone with this, categories that you won't deal with, and categories that you've dealt with and gotten away from. And could you ever get back to? Are there some sorts of tobacco products, for example, that could ever come back? I don't think so. But this was completely impossible, 2 decades ago. But we've seen it coming for a while, and it's just another category. And there will be the share of drink responsibly and all that sort of stuff that will go along with it. So a surprise in some sense, but if you want to figure out why, follow the money, as they say.
That's exactly right. So these once verboten categories, and I think we'll now that we look at it, like, oh, it's okay. And I think we will see it going forward. I think we'll see, I'm waiting for the first cannabis sponsorship at one of the big stick and ball leagues to see how that goes. As how we've thought about marijuana has changed over time. That is something no one's taken the leap of faith yet. But look, necessity is the mother of invention, right? You need money. You're coming out of a pandemic where you've lost billions of dollars as a business. I think it's coming. I don't think it's coming next year, but I think that's another category that we'll look at. Obviously we've seen sports betting and sports gambling categories open up at the team and league level. I think it's just a matter of time. That train is coming down the tracks.
And we'll ease into that too. It'll be CBD first, and then on to the real stuff. So yeah,
I would agree. So the other big piece of news that I'd like to talk about, a bit further, was the conversation around the potential expansion around the college football playoff. And this was not media conversation. This kind of came out of nowhere, where a committee within the college football playoff organization looked at and has openly now discussed the expansion of that college football playoff tournament from a much smaller affair than it is now, a 4-team affair, up to potentially a 12-team affair, which I think took a lot of people by surprise. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on that and knock that around for a bit.
Rarely do I say this about the leaders of sport, but I think there's a stroke of genius here. I mean, because, if they just got up to 8, then somebody would say, why don't we go to 12? And somehow 12 strikes me as a sweet spot number where it's going to be difficult for anybody to say there should be a 64-team tournament for football, which is just not, it's not the same. It's impossible. I mean, 12 is going to be difficult enough. I've heard some of the structuring that allows play to take place and then still utilize bowl games, but you still do get deeper into that territory of football being so much more difficult in terms of missing exams and the timing and that sort of thing. But it's manageable, and it's the kind of thing that we've been working to. And I think hand in hand with NIL and greater recognition of some of the priorities that these players present. So we'll see. But I think, I don't know, what do you think? Is 12 the right number?
I think 12 is okay because, look, so the top 4 teams got to bye. The next 4 teams host a game, so they generate revenue, and there'll have to be some rev share. This is not going to be, eat what you kill. You host the game, you get to keep the revenue. There'll be a rev share component in that, and I think that those games are going to happen relatively quickly after the completion of the regular season and postseason conference championship games, which we'll see if those still stay in place or not. Hard to imagine them going away. But certainly, if you make it to the conference championship game, in most instances, I'd imagine you're going to, in the Power 5 conferences, you're going to qualify for the 12, right? So it decreases the importance of those games. But you're asking a team to turn around in short order, play a game, and the travel, all those things that are associated with it. It's a lot easier to just do one game on the home field. And then you've got the New Year's Bowl games, which ostensibly would serve as the quarterfinals on New Year's Day. And then you've got a semifinal game and then a championship game, or semifinal games and championship game. So I think that it works. I think there's this question of, hey, teams, those teams that don't get a bye could wind up playing like 17 games in the season. It is possible. If you look at what that would entail two upsets, that you'd have to work your way through to get there. Is it possible? Yeah. Is it likely?
Well, you're ready for the NFL then. I mean,
you're right. You're ready for you are unpaid, but you're ready for the NFL, right? At least from a season-long perspective. So no question about that. I do worry about the timing of final exams because that's one of the things we always hear about the playoffs. But the fact of the matter is, Ken, that the football championship is subdivision and Division II and Division III. They already have bigger tournaments than that. Right. So those kids are playing through exams too. Now, one would argue that the pressure at the FBS level is, higher than it is at FCS or D2 or 3. But I look at it and I'm like, if I'm a kid playing D3, like this is, I'm serious about this. This is not any different from maybe the audience is different, but it's not any different. It's still going to be my priority. I worry about it from an academic perspective. Certainly. How about you?
But you've got these added games, which, as you point out, are going to be some rev generators. We've got one other game added in too. If we're going to talk about this, we've got to bring this up: the Jimmy Kimmel Bowl. Come on,
the Jimmy Kimmel Bowl, the LA Bowl. I was surprised. I actually thought it was going to be. I thought Arizona State was going to pony up, and it was going to be the Shropshire Bowl. But I'm just, I'm a little disappointed that wasn't the case. But no, this is a good way to keep those other bowl games involved on an ongoing basis. I think from a revenue perspective, obviously media money's driving the bus on this. And I think that from a media perspective, you heard estimates that, in terms of increased inventory and the number of games, that this could be, a property somewhere in the $1.5 billion range, give or take, depending on who you listen to. Additional sponsorship opportunities for the institutions. Obviously, there's a gate component to it as well. I think that money is driving this. There's no question about it. I think from a fan perspective, it would be great. I certainly think from the perspective of our two alma maters, Stanford and Michigan, it might give us a chance to actually compete in the games.
Yeah, right? and that might
helps the Pac-12.
Yeah, let us qualify what we said earlier. There may be a lot of that going into our belief that 12 is a good number, because it does broaden the opportunities. Now, if you're Ohio State, or especially if you're Alabama or Clemson, you're like, why are we doing that? All we need is four slots. We're going to get one.
We're in it all the time anyway, right? Yeah. So, but look, things change and things evolve. But look, I think you're certainly looking at the Power Five, the rich getting richer, right? So, the Power Five conferences will get additional teams in. It helps the Pac-12, as we mentioned. I think it helps the Group of Five get additional access, which really has been very limited into, certainly not at all into the playoff, and very limited just to exposure into the New Year's Six bowl games. So I certainly think it helps them, and I actually think it could help those schools, become a bit more competitive. But certainly, big picture, right? You're talking about an even bigger separation between the haves that are the Power Five conferences and the have-nots, just because there's more money coming in, and the rev share is only going to benefit those Power Five conferences more than it's going to benefit the Group of Five conferences, because they've got all the leverage. Yeah.
I hope it happens though. I mean, I think 12. And the way they've been talking about is, as you laid out, the design of this and how it will function with buys and who's the home teams. And there's some interesting components to it that could make it a nice, the one thing, and this is not the NCAA, I mean, but the one thing that happens in college sports pretty well is tournaments. I mean, overall, the college sport tournaments are some of the best kinds of tournaments in terms of sports overall. So this. And the college football playoffs has been one that's been somewhat problematic. I think this may there were battles historically to expand the field with the basketball tournament. And now there's some commentary about, okay, maybe we have too many. And this, think about even in hockey, for example, was probably the first place where do we have too many teams that are eligible to be in the postseason kind of tournament play? And that's happening across sports on a greater level now too. This whole season of basketball in the NBA was different. And I think it was in some ways more exciting the way it ended up being structured. I wasn't a proponent of it. And I was looking back at it, it's actually turned out to be okay.
Yeah, I think it's worked out well. Look, I think the expansion of the college football playoff is inevitable. I'm surprised by the number 12. I thought we would see, and we've talked about this for a long time, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, right? 8 to 12. And by the way, 12 also gives you some wiggle room, right? So maybe the presidents ultimately look at this and say, hey, 12 isn't the number, it's too many, but let's go to 8. And that seems like a compromise. And that works out okay too, right? You've seen an expansion, a doubling of the number of teams that are eligible. But I think either way, the expansion, whether it's to 6 or 8 or 12, is absolutely inevitable. There's too much money at stake for it not to happen, right?
Agreed.
How does NIL tie into this?
Well, the more airtime you get as a player, the bigger your brand, the bigger your name. So I think there's going to be a plus for the players that are one of the 12 in terms of what their value is. I mean, think about, again, nobody knows how these contracts are going to be drawn up, but if my team is in the championship, then I get a 10% bump on what you're supposed to pay me for, my association with your brand. So there's only upside there for players. It's, the place where there could be some rub, but again, this is, the idea that you established a new asset. I mean, you've given yourself as college football a new asset, and the concern, as we've talked about before, is how much of that asset will now be taken by individual players as opposed to the team or a conference or whoever else. So there could be a little bit of battle there, but I think the timing is just right. That as NIL goes in play, essentially. In a couple of weeks, we'll be able to see how this balances out.
Well, we'll see about that. So it raises two additional questions. One, does the expansion of the college football playoff dilute the regular season? And if so, then by how much in the conference championship games? And second, as we sit here, the United States Supreme Court has not yet decided the name, image, likeness case that is before it, right? So we'll have a decision in the next week or two. If the court comes down and says, no name, image, likeness, right? This isn't.
Don't ruin our clean record here. There could be a decision,
but there could be. But if they come down though and say no NIL, right? Let's just say that's the hypothetical case, the decision that is reached. Does that impact how you feel about an expansion of the college football playoff? No.
I think the expansion should happen in any event. I think the impact that it has on NIL is, at least from my standpoint, is irrelevant. I think if you're heavily invested in one way or the other as an institution or as an individual player, you might have a viewpoint. But I think for the game overall, and there'll be somebody who will lose, somebody will win a little bit, maybe, increasing to at least 8, hopefully to 12 is a good thing.
So no concern about additional exploitation of the student athlete without ability for that student athlete to monetize it?
That's a good question. I mean, and this gets to the heart of NIL. So you won't be able to monetize or receive the full value of your NIL in that moment, but you will be better known. You'll be closer to Lou Alcindor graduating after 4 years. You'll have that much more exposure than somebody that just comes out after 1 year and not having a lot of exposure. So it's incremental, but I think it's better in terms of being out there. It's better in terms of being able to play a higher level of the game. But what could happen? I mean, the point you're raising goes to this: how many players will opt out of playing in those games and how early?
So it's a great question. I don't think that players opt out when they still have CFP games to play. Yeah. Yeah. So I think for the other bowl games, the non-tournament games, if we're calling it that, non-college football playoff games, I think that train has left the station. I think that for those games, you're going to see more and more players continue to opt out. It's just a business decision, right? We may not like it as fans, but we understand it. It's a business decision that you are making at that moment in time. Why would I play in a meaningless game where I'm risking injury when I have a pretty good idea of where I'm going to be picked already, right? So that's and I think the pros understand that.
Yeah, and that's a great bow reaching back to our original conversation about Naomi Osaka. I mean, the idea of these athletes having the right to make these determinations of what's in their best interest, whether mental health, whether financial, whether physical health, whatever it might be, that ultimately we've got to give greater deference to when those kinds of decisions are made. So, and more, as you say, athletes will choose not to play in the irrelevant bowl games. But it's going to be interesting to see if something starts to happen with the relevant, the actual championship games, the championship lead-up games.
So yeah, and I'll say I'd be surprised if players start opting out of those games. There's too much at stake. The opportunity they're competitive. They want to win. The business decision then is, hey, I'm going to grow my platform. I'm going to increase my exposure if that is a piece of it. But I think ultimately, like, they want to win, right? Why would you get that far and then not play in the championship game? And not play in the playoffs.
Shall reserve this recording.
Well, absolutely. So on that note, Ken, what's coming up that you're keeping your eye on and taking a look at in the coming days?
Big overall for me is still these vaccinations and how they are impacting so many different things, from CP3 and NFL players, and what you're going to be able to do and what you can't do if you have or don't have the vaccination. I mean, there are many good reasons not to get the vaccination. So, and I certainly respect those. If I'm a professional athlete and it's going to foreclose me from playing in a game that I need to play in, the John Rahm moment is still, to me, the deepest COVID kind of moment that existed, and it's the idea that he got a positive test as he was about to kind of win one of the tournaments of his life. It just sends the messaging, and again, the idea of vaccination is not going to prevent everybody from testing positive, but the idea that if you take this step, the protocols are different in the NBA and NFL if you have been vaccinated. And the protocols indicate that you can continue to play in many instances sooner, at least, than if you have not been vaccinated. So it's something to watch to see if there is some kind of sea change that takes place. If there is some major player that ends up not being able to play, although healthy, but they tested positive and did not get the vaccination.
No question. I think that's going to be an interesting one to follow. I'm keeping my eye on the Supreme Court and, waiting for the dropping of the NIL case, sometime in the next few weeks. I know people who are furiously refreshing their browsers to see if it's been released yet. As we record this, it has not.
Well, in closing, Nostradamus, what's your prediction on the?
I could drop my Clubber Lang on you, right? Prediction, pain, right? But the reality is, I have no idea. You ask 10 different people who do kind of the things that we do, and are, quote experts unquote in this space, and I think you'll get 10 different answers. I'm really. I will say I really have. It's not because I don't want to go on a limb. I do. I really have no idea which way they're going to.
The questioning by the court leads you to believe that there's a great admiration of the possibility of greater athlete rights. I don't know what that means, and how you put together a ruling that indicates that is not clear. But you just don't have the impression there's going to be a complete shutout of athlete rights by the court.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to be a complete shutout on the other hand of the NCAA. I think you're going to have to split the uprights on this one, but we'll see. I come to this like I truly have no idea which way they're going to go, because questioning at the court is oftentimes not indicative of the way that the decision ultimately goes down. And to start getting into reading the questioners and what then the intent is going to be, it's really challenging. So, but we'll see. We'll continue to keep our eye on it. And the final thing, other podcasts that we listen to, I know I'm tuning in to the Cusp Show this afternoon, our Columbia University sports podcast that just dropped one with Mike Lombardi, longtime NFL executive and gadfly at this point, and around the league, really good, understand it. How about you?
Well, on Global Sport Matters, we've got a great podcast series coming up pretty soon that Karen Given, formerly of, what's the WBUR show called? Only a Game. She's done a couple of series for us. She did one on the Rooney Rule. She's doing one for us now, basically focused on transgender athletes. It's a two-parter. It will be, from everything she's telling me, it's got a lot of great insight in terms of, and we're calling it the lived experience of a transgender athlete. So as all this, and this is something else, to watch too, as all this legislation and conversation flies around, and as Ted Cruz in the midst of an NIL hearing shifts the conversation to transgender athletes, this podcast with Karen Given tries to get to the heart of what it is we should believe and what we should support regarding this issue. So that's the one I'm waiting for.
Very, very cool. All right. Well, this has been the Sports Professors Podcast. Scott Rosner, Ken Shropshire. See you next time.
Thank you.
The Sports Professors Podcast is brought to you by Global Sport Matters in collaboration with Columbia University. For more news and to sign up for our newsletter from Global Sport Matters, go to globalsportmatters.com. And for more from the Columbia University Sport Management Program, go to sps.columbia.edu/sports. This episode was produced by me, Kendall Jones, Manager of Events and Programs at the Global Sport Institute. And huge thanks to our sound design and editor, Sam Esparza and Big U Music. Global Sport Matters podcast is a production of the Global Sport Institute at Arizona State University. Our Manager of Marketing and Communications is Crisal Valencia. Our Digital Communications Specialist is Brendan Clean. And our Marketing and Event Assistants are Natalie Skegan and Kate Nelson. Find more episodes and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen by searching for Global Sport Matters. And be sure to follow us on Twitter. We're at Global Sport MTRS.